I seem to be on a roll with rifle-based primaries, and I figured, since I've been hyping up so much, I figured I'd do back-to-back anticipations of videos. Instead of this being like deliberated concussive / pacifier and variable videos, I'm going to start talking about something I hinted at in the last weapon analysis. Side effects. Now this might come as a shock to most new viewers here, but prior to starring Helldivers 2 content, we used to do a lot of Terraria content on this channel. So much to the point that the intro to our videos is a modded Terraria song, and one of my personal favorite things about Terraria is how the battles can often be decided based on what side effects you or the bosses in the game even have. Now, I'm not saying that Terraria was the first game in human history to do this. In fact, I'd argue it's a more recent example, if you'd want to put it that way. But the reason why I've started this video off talking about side effects is that Helldivers 2 has these as well, and they affect both the player and enemies. I've already talked about the two major stun primaries, so I think it's only fair if I move on to fire damage instead. Fire damage is a rather finicky piece of shit in Helldivers 2, and I'll be blunt. You have options that work, and then you have options that sometimes don't work out. And then you have the rare, golden opportunity of works a little too well. We saw this with the Breaker Incendiary, which was very unfortunate when it got nerfed, but over time, I'd say it still holds up. Then I never thought we'd see this again. Then the Dust Devils Warbond dropped, and the whole community lost their minds. I don't think this weapon needs any more introduction than that. You know this gun, the middle finger to all rifles, the decimator of bugs, bots, and squids alike, the worst weapon in the entire game, the Coyote. So let's get the usual stuff out of the way. Of course, the Coyote came out in the Dust Devils Warbond, first page. Hey, that seems to be a trend with a lot of the recent videos I've made. What a coincidence. And as it should be noted, it was massively welcomed in with open arms by the community, being the first assault rifle to deal fire damage. Even with an okay-ish ammo economy, a low base damage count, the damage that this weapon did easily outpaced that, meaning the weapon actually had a higher base damage than other primaries. Its versatility on all fronts made it a very quick favorite, and still arguably a favorite of many players today. But note that I said had instead of has. This wasn't a typo. Yes, it still does high fire damage when the enemy catches on fire. Yeah, it's no surprise that this weapon found itself in the sights of Arrowhead's meta-busting team pretty quickly. And despite the promise of buffing every assault rifle to make it as good as the Coyote without nerfing the Coyote, which they did, albeit kind of, they could have done better in my opinion, but that's something for another day. They did something worse than outright nerfing it. They lied about not nerfing the Coyote. Let me explain here. In update 4.1.0, they made a whole bit of, oh look, we didn't do any changes to the Coyote, when in actuality, the devil was in the details. If you read further down on the page onto the enemies tab, you'll find this. Meatmen, slightly less vulnerable to fire due to health increase. Brood and Alpha Commanders, slightly harder to set on fire. Warriors, I'm going to assume all of them, slightly harder to set on fire. Devastators, again, I'm going to assume all of them, slightly harder to set on fire. Factory Strider, I don't know who is trying to fight this with a Coyote, but slightly harder to set on fire. Noticing a pattern here? All of the main medium enemy types that people usually fight at difficulty 8 to 10 are all harder to set on fire. Now, this might seem pretty vague to all of you, so I'll clarify a little bit. Essentially, they changed the chance of how many bullets have to hit in order for an enemy for it to be set on fire. As in my testing, all the other enemies caught fire at the usual rate when using the fire shotguns, as each of those pellets counts as a single bullet, and therefore, they each have equal chances to hit an enemy, meaning the more pellets you hit, the more chances an enemy is going to be caught on fire, so on and so forth. However, for the Coyote, it went from 1 to 2 shots, to 3 to 4, to in one instance I got while recording, 6 repeated shots to the chest, and then catching on fire. It's pretty unfortunate to realize that despite the devs saying we didn't do anything, that they in fact did something that's pretty detrimental to the weapon. What I think made the Coyote appealing to players was its superior crowd control brought about by high damage through fire. And now it can still get high damage through fire, but there's less crowd control because now it has crappier ammo economy than it already had. So to ask the question, is this gun terrible now? Honestly, no, as I think that this gun is still a very powerful primary, although I don't think it's in the same league on all fronts as it used to be. So let's get into how good this gun can be. On all fronts, first thing I recommend when leveling this gun up, this is just my personal preference, is that you put a holographic sight on it as soon as you can. Yes, you can also run a scope and pretend it's the Dragunov, but in reality, I still think it functions better as an assault rifle than a sniper rifle. No armor or stratagem recommendations, well, except until the bot front, outside of the obvious anti-tank and if you run out of ammo situations. On the bug front, this gun is still very, very powerful, despite the unfortunate fire nerf that plagues this weapon. It can still have solid crowd control, but I personally recommend this weapon, especially against the bile spewer and normal beanbag seeds. Also, if you follow CSGO instincts and shoot this weapon in burst fires, you can actually find yourself taking out larger crowds faster than you'd normally think possible with this primary. Against the bots, it's here that I recommend you take an armor that complements getting into prolonged firefights, mostly reinforced armor, as despite the superior crowd control, this weapon does have the issue of taking longer than usual to take down heavier enemies, and as a result, I found myself getting in quite a lot of firefights with medium enemies, like normal devastators and the shield gunners. Thankfully, something I forgot to mention until this point is the rifle does have medium armor penetration, so if you do miss a shot or two, it's still pretty forgiving to those who don't know how to aim. And you can still catch enemies on fire even if you don't hit the weak points. At least in my testing I did. Against the squids, I'll be honest, it's here that this weapon is actually not that terrible against the squids, with the changes being barely noticeable. In fact, something I left out of the previous patch notes session is that elevated overseers actually take more damage from fire now, meaning they're a lot easier to take down. Other than that, I still recommend running reinforced armor or engineering kit if you want to bring more grenades. Also, this is going to sound really crazy here, but this primary actually does help with a fire maxing type loadout. Simply just gotta swap out the Torture with the Coyote, and it's just as good on this front as it is on the bug front. Now that we're here, I think that while the Coyote may have lost some of its former glory after the Shadow nerf slipped in through many adjustments, I still think that it's one of the more reliable and still viable primaries. It's got a unique fire-based damage that sets it apart from most other primaries, well, except for the other two fire-based damage, and it continues to deliver powerful results across all the enemy factions. Sure, I think that the days of calling this gun the worst gun in the game are over, as it's been dethroned from its top tier position. I still think the Coyote still earns its place as a very dependable and reliable support weapon, just like the real Kalashnikov. With all that, let me know in the comments which weapon you'd like for me to analyze next. And with that, thank you for watching. I'll see you all next time.